Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Hi, I'm John Molesky. My guest today is Joseph Dresen. Joe is a senior program associate with the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute, and he's joining us today to talk about a personal experience that we'll extrapolate up from and talk about some broader themes. But Joe was in Chernobyl right before what has been referred to as the most disastrous nuclear power plant accident in world history. Occurred in April 26, 1986. So what are we talking about, April 23rd? When were you there?
Well, I was there 2 days before it happened. I was in Kiev. I was in the Soviet Union with a high school trip. I studied Russian in high school, and
Where was your high school? Where were
it
you
was
from?
at Wilton, Connecticut. It was the only public school in the state at the time to offer Russian, so that was a big draw for
Wow.
those of us who took the language. And the other big draw was the chance to go to the Soviet Union. And so my junior year, I did get to go. We went to first Moscow, then to Kiev, then Leningrad, and 2 days before Chernobyl happened, I was in Kiev. We flew to Leningrad. I was in Leningrad when it happened. And, as we're returning back, we're supposed to touch down in Amsterdam for a night before returning home, but we were actually forced down in Stockholm, Sweden.
Why?
We
What
didn't,
were the circumstances of
well, we didn't know why. We were just very eager to run to the bar and get fresh orange juice for the
Wait a
first
second.
time in 2 weeks.
high schoolers? Oh, the bar, orange juice.
So there was orange juice. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we got back on the plane. We didn't know why why we had landed early, but so we proceeded on with our trip, and we had a nice night in Amsterdam, and then we flew back home, and we didn't learn about what had happened until we touched down in JFK.
Were planes being touched down, were brought out of the sky all over the place in the area?
I don't know, but ours was.
No, yours was.
Ours was.
No announcement, just we're going to land.
No announcement, just we were going to land. And
So at what point did you realize that there was something significant happening?
we didn't realize it until we walked out of the arrival claim, and it was
Back in the U.S.?
back in the U.S. And there was the sort of the headline scroll and the terminal in Kennedy.
And even then, you hear about this thing, nuclear power plant disaster. You don't really understand. How long did it take for you to understand that this was something that would become historic?
Well, within a few days, it was obvious that the fact that it was large enough to register in Scandinavia meant that it was a major incident.
Yeah.
Right? So, there was concern in our town. They even took the students and the teachers who went to the local nuclear power plant and ran us through the radiation checker that they put the personnel
really?
through. Yeah. One chaperone had elevated traces of radioactivity in his shoe, and that was it. But
Wow. And so now fast forward, you decide to make this a career, your interest in Russia.
yeah, so I think Chernobyl helped me decide I wanted to study Russian when I went to college. I really wanted to do something different, and Russia was very different at the time. And then, basically I stuck with it as a career.
Now, when you look back at this incident, a lot of the history is that this was a time of the closed Soviet Union where there was not transparency. How much has changed from now to then, and how do people in Ukraine or in Russia look back at Chernobyl today?
Well, I mean, obviously people in Russia and Ukraine look back at it very differently. People in Ukraine, I mean, it's one of the I think it's one of the major causes of the breakup of the Soviet Union, frankly, because it stirred up a lot of
Just the official handling.
well, the official handling and mishandling, the causes that leading up to the reaction, the result, the response to the reaction, to the accident, and the fact that most of the damage was inflicted on Ukraine and Belarus and not so much on Russia, although it did affect Russia as well. It sort of fomented a lot of unrest in those two republics and spurred a sense of separatism that sort of 5 years later helped contribute to the end of the Soviet Union.
So you think this was a significant contributor to that tipping point being reached?
Not just me.
Yeah.
Gorbachev said so as well.
Yeah.
In I believe 2006, he
Who was
wrote that.
who was the Soviet premier at the time of Chernobyl?
No,
Was it Gorbachev?
It was Gorbachev, and the person they got on in the HBO show Chernobyl doesn't look very much like Gorbachev except for the birthmark on his head. But I will say that what happened with the accident and with the sort of scientific community, the journalists, the advent of perestroika, it all combined to create a space for criticism, and then it went beyond criticism of just the ecology, the environmental damage, the human damage, to criticism of the Soviet system itself.
Joe mentioned, I should tell our viewers and listeners, Joe mentioned the HBO Chernobyl 5-part miniseries. And depending on when you're listening to or watching this conversation, either coming up here at the Wilson Center or it's already happened on June 26th, there's an event that the Kennan Institute is hosting. Could you tell us about that? Because whether it's coming up in the future and you can attend, or whether it's already happened, you can still check it out on our website.
Yeah. Well, so we were fortunate to invite and have Craig Mazin, who's the writer and producer of Chernobyl. It's really his vision that led to the production of this remarkable 5-part miniseries.
So you've been watching?
I watched all 5 episodes.
Oh, you got to see all 5 in advance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, not in advance. I mean, they've been streaming for a while now. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They released it all.
Absolutely. So, it's just, it really evoked the time, the place. I mean, the attention to the detail of the sets is amazing. It really brought me back to when I was, not just a high school student, but even a college student in 1990. Just sort of the look, the feel of the streets, the clothing. It just really.
Is it amazing how, if you've been to a place and then a major news event happens, how different it feels than when you observe major events from afar?
Well, so I didn't observe it up close, but I did.
No, but you were
being
in the region at the time, meeting the people.
So it leaves you with a definite impression, right? And then when you see that realized on the screen, it just brings you back. Sort of like just like a bit of a flashback almost. But
so, in your general work, as the works of experts or researchers, historians, is it easy to miss that ground level view of history?
So George Kennan once said that you really can't understand a country till you have mud on the boots. You need that country's mud on your boots walking around. And there are people who have far more mud on their boots than I do, but my limited time there, again, as a student, as an exchange student, for my limited business trips there, it's just, I just saw sort of the evolution of the Soviet system into the new sort of Russian state that emerged afterwards, and it's just amazing how far they've come, but it's also amazing how far they have left to go. Because I think they also have a system that is different, but at the same time is still relatively closed. Official control over media. They couldn't hide a reaction or an accident in the level of Chernobyl again. But they can sort of mismanage accidents. The most recent example being sort of when the Kursk nuclear submarine exploded and sank. So that was an early example of a young Putin administration being caught flat-footed. Yeah, sort of an impulse for damage control to sort of project an image of strength and not of weakness.
Old habits die hard.
Yeah.
Is there in the Russian experts, is there a consensus on the legacy of Chernobyl?
Well, no, there's never a consensus on anything. But one point of view is, I think one bit of consensus is that it helped contribute to the end of the Soviet Union. There is a lot of debate over just how much, what kind of human toll it took. Some people argue on the low side that it didn't affect more than a couple of thousand people in terms of early deaths, and others argue that as many as 100,000 early deaths for cardiovascular disease, cancer, that sort of thing could be attributed to Chernobyl. The Soviet and then the Russian government have a term they call Chernobyl syndrome or radiophobia, where people are over-concerned about the radiation impact on their direct lives. Mm-hmm. And, it's a...
Sort of PTSD for people.
Well, it might be technically accurate that they're not actually, perhaps not getting a lethal dose of radiation at a given time. It's kind of a inelegant way to sort of backhand legitimate concerns over your health. And if you're in a system where information is closed and people are telling you not to worry, that just makes you worry all the more.
Well, Joe, thank you very much for sharing, weaving your professional insights with your personal experience. But before we close, I want to do another plug. You told me you have a podcast coming up on Chernobyl as well?
Sure. The Kennan Institute is starting a podcast series called Kennan X for the X article. And our first episode coming out in mid-July will be on the subject of Chernobyl. It'll feature some of the audio from our event with Craig Mazin, but we'll also have interviews with some of our other scholars who have written in impressive histories of the Chernobyl event itself.
Excellent. We look forward to it. And of course, you could find that and everything else from the Kennan Institute at wilsoncenter.org. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you as well. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for everyone at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.